Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for attending our event today. Before I introduce our speaker, I just wanted to introduce our co-sponsor for today's event. This is Peg Coleman. She's the president of the Upstate New York Society for Risk Analysis, and she's going to say a couple of words about opportunities available with this society before I introduce.
I wanted to tell you, first of all, that we have the honor of offering you a chance to win a free membership. So there's a raffle in the back near the pizza, the yellow slips of paper. Fill in your name and your email address, and we'd be happy to bring you in as a student member if you are the lucky winner. You'll also see this green form. This is our URL for the Upstate New York chapter. Go ahead and take one of these and contact us. Check out our website. You'll see a few of these journals for display. Take a look. There actually is a specialty issue on terrorism. Unfortunately, I didn't bring that with me today, but you can find that journal. And the last piece, there is an SRA Risk Policy and Law Specialty Group. So you can find like-minded people who are interested in the interface between risk analysis, public policy, and law. All these contacts I'll leave on the back table, or you can find my email address on this website for Upstate New York Society for Risk Analysis. Good luck if you put your name in the raffle. Thank you.
I am so excited to introduce Professor Mueller to you. When I was preparing the introduction, which actually required significant preparation, because if I read his entire biography to you, we would be here for the entire 50 minutes. He is an exceptionally accomplished guest today. But I came across a quote that someone wrote about one of your books, and it says, "Mueller makes you think, and his method of argument combines fresh insights with trenchant prose in a way that makes thoughtful reading agreeable." I couldn't agree more. I highly recommend his book, and if you're going to take the Homeland Security class in the spring, it'll be assigned, so you might as well buy it now. Get ahead on your reading. So Professor Mueller joins us from Ohio State University, where he holds two positions. He is the Ralph D. Mershon Senior Research Scientist at the Mershon Center for International Security Studies, and he's also an adjunct professor of political science. There will be a quiz. I'm just kidding. Before joining Ohio State in 2000, he was on the faculty at the University of Rochester, so he's kind of from the neighborhood, so to speak. In going over all of Professor Mueller's accomplishments, I identified 11 books and related to this, to the topic of security. I think that's right. By way of introduction, I'm just going to read you three of the book titles. The one for today, Terror, Security, and Money. But also last year, Atomic Obsession, Nuclear Alarmism from Hiroshima to Al-Qaeda. And also Overblown, How Politicians and the Terrorism Industry Inflate National Security Threats and Why We Believe Them. He has also written 3 books on dance, which I think is a topic for another day. He has written scores of monographs and articles in addition to the books. Some interesting titles from this list: At All Costs, The Destructive Consequences of Anti-Proliferation Policy, Embracing Threatlessness, Reassessing U.S. Military Spending, and The Terrorism Delusion, America's Overwrought Response to September 11th. He has received a number of research grants and teaching awards. He has also been a think tank fellow. He's currently the senior fellow at Cato, but he's also worked with Brookings and a little place called the Hoover Institution at Stanford. Lest you think he just spends all day typing, he also has been interviewed on numerous radio programs, including NPR's On Point, Marketplace, and All Things Considered. He's a blogger also. You can find his work on a skeptic's blog. It's the nationalinterest.org. I can put that up later if you want. He's also done a number of television interviews from the O'Reilly Factor, Hannity and Combs, etc., but also The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, in case any of you are Daily Show fans. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor Mueller.
Okay, thanks very much. Really glad to be here. My marching orders are to try to finish in 30 minutes or so, by 12:30, 12:35. And I think the room turns into something else before 1, so I want to leave a certain amount of time at least for comments, questions, and expressions of outrage. The book Terror, Security, Money actually came out of my interview when I was on The Daily Show. Mark Stewart, who's an engineer and risk analyst, was visiting Ohio State at the time, and he saw the interview, and he emailed me saying, hey, I've been working on something like that, and explained what he was doing, and we got together, and so the rest has been a whole lot of papers. We published 25 or so articles in various places, as well as the book. One of the places we actually published an article was in Playboy, and Mark is really happy with that because he's the first engineer who's ever been able to footnote Playboy before. Okay, well, what I want to deal with is particularly this book that we finally put together from out of those papers and other things, and we're still working on the project. Sort of the background, in some respects, is this. A quote from Scott Atran, which I just ran across fairly recently, an anthropologist at the University of Michigan and also in France. Perhaps never in the course of human history have so many people, with so few capabilities actually frightened so many. And that fright remains there. Just this last summer, I've been working on public opinion and terrorism. And the top line there is, you can see the question, how worried are you that you or someone, a member of your family, would become a victim of terrorism? This is the death of Osama bin Laden, and this is 9/11. You can see it went way up at the time of 9/11, but by the end of 2001, it settled down to about 40%, and it's still at basically the same level. And I looked at a whole bunch of other public opinion questions, including this one. This is how likely do you think there'll be another major attack? Despite the fact there's been no major attack since 9/11, the percentage of people say they're worried or somewhat worried about it has remained at about 70%, with some ups and downs dealing with the war in Iraq. So I'll be glad to talk more about the public opinion stuff, but that's just a beginning project I'm working on. I'd like to deal with, sort of three things. There's actually supposed to be a slide on this. One is terrorist capacities. The second, the issue of acceptable risk. And the third is cost-benefit analysis. And the idea basically show you what Mark and I have been doing, the way we've been trying to look at this issue. But the thing we want to start with is what is the threat? And that has been something I've been very much concerned about and dealing with in a lot of different ways. The Department of Homeland Security, in a report that came out in the first year of the Obama administration, it talks about the adversary, as they call him. And this is their entire description of what the adversary is like. Relentless, patient, opportunistically flexible, shows consequent, carefully planned attacks on the economy and so forth. You can read it through faster than I can read it to you. And very dangerous and so forth. And that's it. This whole report, which runs about 80 pages, this is the only description of what the enemy is like. Now, there are some terrorists like that, but they're also, the vast majority, it seems, are quite unlike that. And let me turn to a different issue. A book I've done, which is a web book, is this. I edited. It came out of a honors seminar I did at Ohio State a couple of years ago, and we took all the cases in which there was an arrest for terrorism in the United States, for people who were planning to fight, to deal with, to do something bad in the United States, whether they themselves were based in the United States or abroad. So the underwear bomber is in there, as well as people trying to blow up, a shopping mall in Illinois. And one of the things I asked the students to do is explain to me what these guys were like that you're studying in each case. And they didn't come up with descriptions that were very much like what the Department of Homeland Security said. Instead, basically, these are the kinds of words that they came up with almost completely. They never, one word that is quite important often is gullible. Basically, they looked at all these guys, and these are the kinds of words that constantly came up. The words clever, diabolical, and so forth were not there, except maybe sometimes to explain the activities of an FBI informant. These are the cases, 50 cases, and presumably going up. In all the 50 cases, there's only been 3 in which anybody's been killed. 2 of those are questionable whether they really were terrorism. Anyway, it's questioned. They're the underlying ones. So the LL case in LAX was an Egyptian who really hated Israel, but he was going nuts because his wife left him, going back to Egypt and so forth, and he went down to LL in LAX and started shooting the place up. And maybe that's terrorism because it was obviously focused, but it's obviously somewhat ambiguous. The other case is the killings at Fort Hood, took place 3 years ago, in which an Army psychiatrist sort of went berserk because he was obsessed by the idea of the Army sending Muslims to fight and kill Muslims in Afghanistan, which he considered to be a great sin. Anyway, he then went to a recruiting station, a deployment station, and shot the place up, killing 13 people. And that's terrorism pretty much, but nonetheless somewhat ambiguous. The only case that's really unambiguous is the Little Rock case in 2009, in which one person was killed. This guy really was a jihadist. He basically went everywhere. He had a list. He was trying various times, and he tried 3 times before he finally did anything. The first, he was in Tennessee, and he wanted to kill a rabbi in Memphis. And his idea about killing the rabbi was to throw a Molotov cocktail against the rabbi's house to set it on fire. How exactly that would kill the rabbi, who would, if the fire took place, would leave in the other direction, is not clear. But anyway, that was his idea. So he threw the Molotov cocktail, and there were 3 problems. One is the Molotov cocktail bounced off the window. The second is it didn't explode anyway. And the third is he had the wrong house. So after that, he went to an Army recruiting station in Tennessee and was going to shoot that up, but it was closed. Then he went back to Little Rock and got really mad after watching a jihadist video, went down to a recruiting station that was about 3 miles from his apartment and shot 2 guys who were out on a smoke break. He killed one and wounded the other. Then he took off in his car, made a wrong turn, and was arrested in 12 minutes. So that's basically it on this. None of these guys are sweethearts, but many of them certainly have been brought along by informants, not including him. In particular, there's the Prague synagogue case, number 25 at the top. This is the statement by the judge when she sentenced this guy to 25 years in jail. These guys utterly inept and on a fantasy terror operation. Only the government could have made a terrorist out of the plot's leader, whose buffoonery is positively Shakespearean in its scope. I believe beyond a shadow of a doubt, I think that's too extreme, but anyway, she said beyond a shadow of a doubt that there would have been no crime here except the government instigated it, planned it, and brought it to fruition. And that's the case in literally 25 of the 50 cases in which has been an informant who's been crucial, vital. None of these guys are sweethearts. All of them were spouting the jihadist rhetoric and so forth. But the question, and repeatedly, or almost all of them, the question repeatedly is, would they have ever been able to do anything at all? No jihadist in the United States has been able to set off a single bomb, including this Molotov cocktail. That's the closest they ever even came. Many of them tried to set off bombs that were given to them by the FBI, but that doesn't really count. And for that matter, neither is any jihadist in Britain, except for the attacks on the subways in 2005, 4 bombs. They've never been able to detonate a bomb, which is pretty impressive given the previous record, for example, of the Irish Republican Army, which set off lots of bombs. So that's the basic case, it seems to me. If you look at terror in terms of domestic terrorism, if you look at terrorism abroad, it's basically, it seems to me, a very limited issue. I don't even think of it as a threat, maybe a problem, but not a threat. Maybe that's just semantics, I don't know. But if you look at the number of people killed worldwide by al-Qaeda types, Muslim extremists, including people who are mainly focused on Kashmir and so forth, outside of war zones, it comes to maybe 200 to 400 or so people a year. That includes the attack on London and on Madrid and on Bali and the Mumbai attack and so forth. Those are all tragedies and horrible, but the total number obviously comes out to be a pretty low one. What al-Qaeda basically has done since 9/11 is produce a lot of videos, very good at that, issued a lot of threats. They've been threatening constantly to hit the United States, and they've never done it, essentially. They've done some limited training, maybe. They've been an inspiration, certainly, but of course they could be an inspiration without even existing. They've helped the Taliban's much bigger effort in Afghanistan a little bit, very small part of it. They may have done some terrorism in Pakistan, this al-Qaeda Central, and most of the terrorism that's been connected to them has been wildly counterproductive, including, of course, 9/11. But blowing up a hotel wedding in Jordan because you don't like the fact that Jordan is supporting the United States in the war in Iraq is not the best way to get support in Jordan. People don't like to be blown up in Jordan any more than they like to be blown up in Manhattan. and it's been basically counterproductive. When bin Laden was captured last year, a lot of information, this was going to be this big treasure trove of information that was coming out. What they mostly found is the treasure trove showed that their Al-Qaeda Central, at least, was dealing with three things. One is dodging drone strikes. The other was complaining about a lack of money. And the third is watching pornography. In terms of weapons of mass destruction, which I'd be glad to talk about if you want, the budget in 2011 for weapons of mass destruction was apparently zero. That was down from what it was in 2011 when a captured Al-Qaeda computer indicated that their total budget for all weapons of mass destruction research was between $2,000 and $4,000. All of that on some very primitive work with chemical weapons, not nuclear. Okay, let me turn to the acceptable risk issue, the second issue I want to deal with. And I'm going through this pretty fast because I want to finish pretty much on time here and let you in on the issue. One issue that doesn't come up is acceptable risk. We've got this problem. We've got people trying to kill each other. There's 50 people. Some of those people might well have done something bad. A few of them did, obviously. But the question is, how bad is the risk, and where is it acceptable? This is a statement which I've used many times by Michael Moore in 2003 on 60 Minutes. He said, the chance of any of us dying in a terrorist incident is very, very, very small. Bob Simon, his interlocutor, said, no one sees the world like that. And I've always liked this exchange because both statements are true. And the issue basically is to try to get a handle on what Moore is saying, and it's pretty easy to get one. We also have other people saying similar sorts of things. You've heard stuff like this. On the 5th anniversary of 9/11, Charles Gibson on ABC News, now putting your child on a bus or driving across a bridge or just going to the mall, each of these things is a small act of courage, and peril is a part of everyday life. I've given up going to malls because I can't stand being around all those heroes all over the place. Okay. Now, this is what acceptable risk, the way you should look at it. What is your chance of being killed by a terrorist? Well, it comes out to be basically about 1 in 3.5 million per year. Your chance of being killed in an automobile accident, if you're male and 19 years old, you should really think about this because it's a lot higher than that for those people, about 1 in 8,000. Your chance of cancer is there. Industrial accidents of being killed by a deer, 1 in 2 million. Lightning is 1.7 million. Okay, that's where you should start. You could argue that this is low because terrorists are going to get a lot more capable in the future. This includes 9/11 in the calculation, by the way. And you could say, well, that's where it is now, but this is history. Is it going to get a lot worse in the future? Well, then it's up to you to explain why terrorists are going to be much more capable in the future than they have so far, particularly if they can't get nuclear weapons. Which I'll be glad to talk about if you want. But it's 1 in 3.5 million. So consequently, that's where you should actually start. That's the way you should deal with it. That's what the risk is. And so consequently, but no one ever says that. There's only been one case in which an official, since 9/11, I've looked really hard, has said, you get a life, your chance of being killed by a terrorist is about the same as being killed by lightning. And that was Mayor Bloomberg in 2007. He still got reelected in 2009. I should point out. That's the only case anybody said that. Now, everybody should know this number. It doesn't end the debate or discussion. Maybe that's not high enough. Maybe that's not low enough, whatever. Maybe you want to spend more money to really lower it, but it really should be there, and it isn't in the discussion. Now, actually, it has gotten into discussion in a backwards way once. This was on the Lair NewsHour, PBS NewsHour it was then. Margaret Warren is talking to John Pistole, who is the head of Transportation Security Administration. How much of a radiation risk is exposed to, and how much that measures up to what is allowable? This is with these body scanner things. And Pistole basically says the risk is acceptable. He says, we've done a number of studies, Margaret, that deal with this by various organizations, which have independently assessed that obviously that's something we're concerned about. Can you get cancer from being hit by the body scanners? And they've all come back to saying the exposure is very, very minimal, and it's well within the standards that have been set. He doesn't say it's zero. So the question is, what are the standards that have been set? And it's possible to calculate that. This is the same statement I had before, just to remind you. A guy named Peter Rez at the Arizona State University, Tempe, has calculated your chance of getting cancer from one body scan is about 1 in 30 million. And the way that's calculated, I explain how he does it. It's pretty straightforward stuff. given sort of the way they've sort of established radiation risks. It's almost certainly high, but anyway, that's a different issue. Then he says, therefore, TSA considers a potential fatality of 1 in 30 million exposures to be well within safety limits. That's what Pistole just said, right up there. Okay, then the question is, what is your chance of being killed on an airplane? And Rez also calculated that present experience suggests the chance of boarding an airplane that is subsequently blown up by terrorists is about 1 in 30 million. Therefore, it follows that the risk is acceptable. That by their own standards, it's the same risk, therefore you should either not spend more money on reducing that risk further, or you should also spend it on reducing the risk from body scanners. And they simply haven't done so. And the issue basically then is not, are we safer? Clearly we're safer if the threat hasn't gone up, and if you put one bodyguard someplace, or if you put a lock on your door, you're safer. The question is, how safe are we? Or as one risk analyst put it in 2003, 2002, how much should we be willing to pay for a small reduction in probabilities, risks that are already extremely low? And that's basically what Mark and I have tried to do in this, with this cost-benefit analysis, risk analysis. So let me just sort of explain what we tried to do. The book is totally open. You can read it. You can look at the assumptions. You can look at the estimates and so forth. You can complain. You can say, I want to do the other ones, and which is the way it should be done, of course. We find very little indication that the Transportation Security Administration or DHS or anybody else has done much of this analysis. Insofar as they've done it, it's classified, which is very bad because, as you'll see, we have to make assumptions, and you have to make clear what your assumptions are. So other people can, like any scientific endeavor, obviously, can say, no, wait a minute, that whatever, it's too high, it's too low, whatever. But let me explain what we've gone through on this. As I found out when starting to work with Mark Stewart, risk is actually pretty not very difficult issue, at base at least. I mean, I'm not a mathematician, I'm not a risk analyst, I'm not an economist. And it wasn't hard really to get into this, and of course I have Mark, if I screw up, Mark is there to correct it. But there's basically only 4 things you need to do. We're not talking very complicated. One is calculating what the risk, to do cost benefit, what the benefit is. And there's 3 things as part of that. One is the probability of a successful attack. The second is the losses sustained in the successful attack. And the third is the reduction in risk caused by the security measure. What happens is you've got a dangerous curve on a road, and there's an accident every once in a while. So you say, you have some data, reason to think, what is the probability there'll be an accident there? That's one thing you want to consider, likelihood. Once every year, once every 5 years, once every 10 years, once every 10 minutes, whatever. Then you say, how bad is the accident? What are the losses in the accident? Someone gets killed, there's a minor injury, there's just a fender bender, whatever. And so you have some idea of how bad the consequences are. Then you say, okay, let's spend money on reducing the risk. The first 2 things are the risk, and the third is the reduction in risk. So you do that by 2 things. Either you reduce, in the case of the analogy I've given you, you reduce the likelihood of an accident on that curve. So you put up signs saying dangerous curve ahead. Or you lower the speed limit, or you have flashing signs or something. So that would reduce the likelihood that there is an accident, you hope. And so the question is, how much does that cost to do that, put up a sign, whatever. The other would be to reduce the losses sustained in the accident. So you basically do something that even if there is an accident, it's not as bad. So you put up a rail guard or something. So that if the guy goes off the road, he doesn't go down the hill, it basically bounces off the rail, much less likely being a chance of being killed and so forth. So you have risk measures, security measures, which reduce either the likelihood it'll happen, in this case a terrorist attack, or the losses sustained in the terrorist attack. You protect the building, or you police. In the case of terrorism, you reduce the probability of a successful attack by policing better. For example, you catch a guy before he does it. That's good. Or you protect it so that even if he is successful, it's not going to be as bad as before because you've got protection measures around the building and things like that. And then you have to figure out how much does risk get reduced by those measures. So you say, well, it gets reduced by 5%, or 10%, or 50%, or 90%. That's not an easy thing to basically calculate, but it's not mathematics. It's basically sort of figuring it out, and you have a range. Well, somewhere between 40% and 70%. Okay, let's consider that whole range. And then maybe you want to consider it on either end too. So you can play around with the numbers and see basically how much leeway there is in your calculation. So that's the benefit. The cost then is the cost of the security measure. Putting up a road sign saying dangerous curve ahead is obviously pretty cheap. If it reduces the risk much at all, reduces the likelihood of an accident at all, it's probably worth it because how much it costs. Rebuilding the road is very expensive. Maybe worthwhile, but it's a lot more expensive. And so you want to know, does that really reduce the risk enough to justify this expenditure? If we only have one accident there every 300 years, do we really want to spend that money on that when we could be spending on something else? Okay, there's various ways of dealing with this, and we do in the book, but the way that's easiest to grasp, it seems to me, is what is called break-even analysis. The first idea that Mark brought to me, which really turned me on to the whole approach. Break-even analysis is, say, suppose we're going to set the cost equal to the benefit. And this is the equation. The benefit is these three things multiplied by each other. The probability there's to be an attack, the losses sustained in that attack, and how much the risk reduction is. Then you set that equal to the cost. So you want to know at what point do these balance out. Now, the really good thing about this extremely simple equation, obviously, it's hard to think of one that's more simple, is that you can avoid the problem of trying to figure out what the probability of an attack has to be by solving for it. So using the first thing you learned in high school algebra, you simply move one thing to the other. And so therefore now, instead of saying that trying to calculate all four of those, you only have to calculate the cost, which is here, divided by the losses and risk reduction. So you say basically, given the cost of the security measure, which is often not all that hard to figure out, I mean, rebuilding the road, putting up a sign, whatever it is, and you divide that by the losses. Will it be a fatal accident? Will it be 10 people being killed? Will it be 0 people being killed? And the risk reduction, which is a variable which you might want to play around with. What does the probability have to be so that the whole calculation basically becomes, you reach a break-even point where the situation is the cost equals the benefit. You presumably want the benefit to be higher than the cost, but this is the break-even. This is where you start. If you can move upward from there in terms of benefit or downward from there in terms of cost, you've got a security measure that passes a cost-benefit calculation. Okay, we've done that for various things. What am I doing on time? Oh, not too bad. I'll give you just sort of a result that's in the book about this. We, first of all, looked at the cost of protecting a building, an office building, pretty much like this. There are a lot of office buildings like this in the country with offices and cafeterias and meeting rooms and so forth in universities and obviously businesses and so forth and government throughout the country. And so how much is it worth protecting that building against a terrorist attack, like a Timothy McVeigh attack? Okay, what we do is sort of lowball everything. First of all, we figure out what are the costs of protecting the building. Well, we take a case of only spending $250,000 a year on that. That's not very expensive. That's a few security guards. Or putting up some ball yards on the outside. And you can imagine it'd be much higher than that. There are other things we leave out, such as the inconvenience of having to go through security and so forth, which can cost a lot of money. But we take a lowball estimate of how much the losses, what the cost of it would be. Second, we assume for the attack would be cause a lot of damage, $2 billion. That includes the loss of quite a few people being killed and a really severe property damage. So we're taking the case of a pretty extensive Timothy McVeigh type attack, like on Oklahoma City office building back in 2005. Then we also say, well, how much do these security measures reduce the risk? So that's the third thing. And we say, okay, let's say practically 100%, 95%. We'll give you, say, we don't really believe this, but nonetheless, we're willing to say these are really effective. So, and almost eliminating the risk completely. So you got a cheap measure that protect you, 95% protects you against a very bad attack. And so the question is that cost effective? Well, then what you do is you look at what's the probability of a building being attacked now, and the result would be that the likelihood of a successful attack on a typical office-type building for which there's no specific threat, obviously if you have intelligence saying these guys are going to attack that building, that's a whole different game, would have to be 1,000 times higher than it is at present for protective security measures to begin to be cost-effective, even under those extreme circumstances. And you can play around with the numbers. We've already biased the case strongly against what we want to say. We can say $250,000, that's nothing a year. But what if it's $1 million? Then these numbers are going to be more ridiculous. Okay, moving to Homeland Security. The question is, how much has Homeland Security spending in the United States increased since 9/11? It comes out to be about $1 trillion. That's not only by the Department of Homeland Security, that's also by the military. They protected their bases in the United States. They're moving a whole bunch of people out of the Pentagon area to Fort Belvoir. And there's the Justice Department. The FBI apparently has this thing called a threat matrix. And every single day, it's looking at 5,000, quote, threats, unquote. Very impressive. There have only been 50 cases, they pointed out. But they're still looking at everything that could possibly be a, quote, threat, unquote. Which basically, those are leads, not really threats. But anyway, the FBI spends a lot of money on it and so forth. Then and there's local police protection and so forth. Okay, it comes about this is increase since 9/11 and assumes 9/11 expenditures, pre-9/11 expenditures continue, and there were quite a bit of them, and this is the increase since 9/11. Okay, so now what do we say? We lowball the cost. We don't count the whole trillion. We say, well, throw out this, throw out that, and because there's maybe some people who question it and so forth, and it's a little bit, it's definitely there, but we're not quite sure about the number. Let's throw it out. And so we basically conclude about 700 million, 700 billion rather, since 9/11 has been the increased expenditure since 9/11. We also assume that the attack would be extraordinarily horrible. It would be our best estimate for how much the cost would be if the Times Square bomber had been successful is probably about $100 million. He'd kill people, he would destroy some property, there's also pain and suffering, all that has to be included. He'd also reduce tourism to New York for a while and so forth because of fear, and that's relevant and so forth. Is maybe $100 million, but if he was spectacularly successful and bigger and so forth, maybe it was $500 million, $500 million a year, 500 million per attack. Now we also say that we assume that all these protective measures, which would cost $1 trillion, reduce the risk by 45%. We assume basically, and these are all assumptions you can argue with and you can play around with. They're all transparent. Transparent is Mark Stewart's favorite word. But we assume that the security measures before 9/11 are about 50% effective, and the enhanced ones are add another 45%. The reason we do that is the question before 9/11, there already were a lot of good security measures. Most of the things on airlines were already there, the metal detectors. People in the New York Police Department have said things like, everything we do, we already had that before 9/11. This stuff isn't necessary. So the 9/11 Commission report basically said, they had a lot of critiques, but it all said, we were in pretty good shape overall. Too bad tragedy we missed 9/11, obviously, and they could be better, unquestionably. But nonetheless, there was a lot of security going on. Police were, terrorism was not a new idea overall, particularly after Timothy McVeigh's attack in Oklahoma City. And so we assume they're very effective. They basically close the gap between 50% and 100%. So again, we're biasing the case against finding these measures to be cost effective. Well, the result of that basically would be that these enhanced security measures would have to deter, foil, or disrupt or protect against 333 large attacks, 5 times bigger probably than the Times Square attack, every year in order or one a day basically, for the enhanced security measures to begin to be cost effective. In the book, actually, we used 100 million, and basically it's about, you'd have to have about 4 a day. And so in recent things we said, well, it's hard to grasp. But basically, the money has been spent. Basically, in order to argue that this money has been spent effectively, you'd have to argue that they've prevented one attack a day. Okay, last thing I want to do, and I'll just this is looking at the body scanners thing, give you some quick idea of this. I'll be glad to go into more detail if you want. Also, I know the room turns into a pumpkin at 1 or something, and I'll be around for the rest, for a while. If you want to talk to me afterwards, I'd be glad to do it. Let me just give you a quick thing of this, which has been published in a peer-reviewed journal, as has a lot of our other stuff, including what you've already heard. The cost of the body scanner pat-down is 1.2. What's the cost of body scanner? It's $1.2 billion a year. That's very impressive. I told a student in LA Comp, and he was flabbergasted. He said, $1.2 billion is the cost of the Los Angeles police force. That's how much the body scanners cost, particularly because of personnel costs. And we also assumed that if somebody who blew up an airliner, the cost would be about $26 billion. It's only one airliner would not be crashed into something because it would not be unlike 9/11. The total cost of 9/11 are probably about $200 billion, with the 4 airliners plus the building destruction, plus obviously the huge amount of people not flying and stuff like that. So we hit 26 billion. They explain how we come to that conclusion. It's one you can argue with if you want. Okay, now if you look at the cost-benefit analysis, the issue we're trying to work out even more now is sort of the whole flow of airline protection measures. So we further assume one is that the probability it will be successful at avoid detection of each of the pre-boarding measures is 90%. That, in other words, that we've got a whole bunch of pre-boarding measures, such as the no-fly list and the metallic thing, whatever. And we assume that the terrorist is going to get past each of those with 90% certainty. Only 10% that each one will pick them up. Secondly, we assume that the terrorist stands a 50% chance of avoiding a successful crew and passenger resistance, which we think is ridiculously low. If the terrorist tries to set off a bomb that wasn't caught by the AITs, the body scanners, there's a the crew and passengers resistance is likely to be extremely high, as it was on both the underwear bomber and the shoe bomber. And the likelihood of a successful detonation is 75%. The setting off a bomb that you smuggled in on your underwear is extremely difficult, partly because you can't take metal detonators in because they're maybe caught by the magnetic stuff that was there before 9/11. So we assume nonetheless that there's 75% chance of detonating it, and the likelihood of an explosion that will down the airliner is 75%. Because you blow up a small bomb on an airplane doesn't mean it will crash. There's been cases of whole sides of airplanes blowing out, not because of explosion, because of structural problems, and the plane still landed, including one over the Pacific. Just a few years ago, 2 years ago or so, the seam of the fuselage of a Southwest airliner split open. People were looking up and seeing blue sky, and the oxygen masks are falling. It's a big hole, and it still landed. No one is hurt. So it doesn't follow just because you can set off a bomb, it's going to blow up the airliner. Okay, summarizing, we have these things which I've within the first half. There's a 90% chance under these assumptions that the attack will fail due to existing security measures, terrorism, incompetence, and amateurishness in here, and the technical difficulties of setting a bomb sufficiently destructive to down an airliner. The result is that the body scanner pat down, that's basically 90% protection from all this, and then we give basically the body scanners the rest of it, another 10% practically. And so the results of that basically similar sort of thing. Assuming these assumptions, how many otherwise successful attacks would there have to be for the body scanners to begin to be cost effective? And it comes out to be about one every other year, about 0.54 a year. Some people may see that as borderline cost effective. If you think that they would have been able to blow up an airliner successfully without the body scanners, one every other year, though of course there's only been 2 real attempts, and we have before the body scanners were in, both of them failed abysmally. Okay, let me end on that and let you scream and holler or whatever you want to do. But the idea basically is sort of show how you can look at this stuff. I do want to stress that it's messy in the sense that you don't really know what the risk reduction is. So what I've given you examples of, okay, we don't know exactly. It's going to be, but it's not, it's not flipping a coin thing. It's got to be somewhere. And you can, and there's studies about these things, and you can come up with basically ideas about roughly where it is. And then you can vary that. Okay, we think our best guess is that the reduction is 50%. Then you can say, okay, well, what about 70%? What about 30%? And so you can play around with that. It's called robustness checking. Basically, how robust are the findings, susceptible, how much are they dependent on small changes in the assumptions? And the basic idea with the assumptions is that if you make an assumption and someone can say, look, you move that assumption by 5%, then you come up with a different result, then that's not very robust. That's bad. Because that means it's very dependent on something that you yourself say is, we're not quite sure about. If, on the other hand, and in these cases it's always the case, if, on the other hand, you say we can change the assumptions enormously, and it still doesn't become cost effective, then you're in pretty good shape. And what's happened since 9/11 is a fantastic amount. It's easy to do this because a fantastic amount of money has been thrown at this problem, and with very little discussion about is it cost effective. Should it have been done? There was a study by the National Academy of Sciences that was done. It came out in 2010, in September, 1 year before the 10th anniversary of 9/11. A bunch of risk analysts worked for a better part of 2 years in assessing the risk analysis that was being done in the Department of Homeland Security, and they concluded, probably not quite fairly, but they concluded basically was that DHS doesn't know what it's doing. The way they put it was only slightly more delicate than that. What they concluded was that we couldn't find any risk analysis that justified any decision they've ever made. And as I say, that's not quite fair. I think there are some things there in there. But let me just say one more final thing here. If you're looking at this from the standpoint of 9/11, no one is going to say that people weren't scared in 2001, 2002. Okay, you got a new terror risk. We don't know how big it is. There can be a lot of people who think there'd be 9/11s every few months. Okay, panic, throwing money at the problem, perfectly understandable. No one knows, and you want to err on the safe side. Fine, no complaints. Well, some complaints, but not a lot. Then after 5 years, you say, well, there hasn't been anything. Maybe we should go back and reevaluate those measures. Then after 8 years, Bush is finally out of office. You get a new administration coming in. You can say, look, Bush was so tied up with the 9/11 thing. It was his legacy was, the greatest traumatic experience you can imagine for a president, practically. Obviously, his whole administration is tied up with that. Okay. Now we got a new president, whether it had been McCain or Obama, actually. And you think, well, after 8 years, maybe we should start, 7 years in that case, maybe we should start taking this seriously and think about it. And now it's obviously more than 10 years since 9/11, and it still basically seems to have not been done. The problem is, in many cases, as my analysis already suggests, I think, is that if you do the analysis, you're going to come up with the conclusion that an awful lot of money has been misspent. And if you're a bureaucrat, the question is, basically you don't want to hear that. You also don't want to hear that your budget should be reduced. So if you're head of the Department of Homeland Security and say, hey, your chance of being killed by a terrorist is $1 in $3.5 million a year, what you might hear is people saying, then how come we're giving you so much money? That doesn't, I think, excuse them from telling the truth, but it's understandable. But if all they care about is being in office, they should say, I don't care about security, I only care about staying in office. Okay, anyway, let me end on that. But, yes, ma'am.
Thanks for your presentation. I found it really interesting. I guess I have two questions. One about the assumptions and the robustness of the assumptions, specifically on the. It occurs to me that for the components of the current national security bureaucracy, arrests might not be a sufficient proxy for the risk, i.e., that arrests are an instance where someone has been incompetent and messed up in some way such that they've been identified, but that there's always a claim that there's a non-falsifiable conspiracy that extends far beyond the 50 arrests or so that you listed there. So I guess if you could say something about the robustness of that assumption specifically. And then secondly, I wondered, in the list of relative risks that you gave, in which lightning and drowning in a bathtub are among the risks, it just gave me pause about the kind of normative distinction between homicide, where there's a moral agent, and terrorism versus the others. And I wondered if, and to what extent, international law and an argument that terrorism, particularly with links to Al-Qaeda, is somehow different in nature and something that the government has to take more seriously would factor into your argument.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, we try to deal with both of those in a lot of different ways. The issue about, and there's also an article, by the way, that deals with it fairly frontally in current issue of International Security called The Terrorism Delusion. We do get the guys who are arrested. We also have looked somewhat at what the FBI says the people who got away. And it's not, if the people who got arrested, which you'd have to argue is the people who didn't get arrested are really incredibly clever, and we only caught the dumb ones. To a degree, that's probably the case, because of the loudmouth types. But if there are a bunch of people out there who are really great terrorists, the question is, why don't they do something? If they've been here for 10 years, the longer they wait, the more likely they are to be picked up. Also, when you look at, and so probably the people who haven't been arrested, and there's also been a lot of people who they've suspected of being terrorists, but they couldn't bring them to court, and so they got them on immigration violations or something, sent them out, or they got them on pickpocketing or drug dealing or something. Yeah, well, the drones, that's an overseas thing, not inside.
Right.
So the question is, are there more threats within the country? And when they picked up these guys, actually, some of the Syracuse data would be helpful on this. It does not seem to be that in the 50 cases we've ever had a recidivist case. They say none of the cases was someone who wanted to be a terrorist before and was waylaid or deterred because of he's arrested for pickpocketing and he thought it might be a terrorist. You would expect them to actually be arrested. You'd expect them to eventually try again and then get caught. And so you don't. So you basically have. It's not clear that the people who are not arrested are any more intelligent than the one that were, and they're and in order to say anything other than the numbers, you'd have to argue that all the really smart ones were not there, and also, like I said at the beginning, they'd actually have to do something. In terms of the risk thing, let's see if I get that in here again. No. That's a good table to leave on. Get it here. This may look familiar. My favorite quote, and then this. Okay. We do basically argue that terrorism is worse than other forms of fatality because they cause emotional problems and because they cause economic problems, people not dealing. For example, if 9/11 people wouldn't fly. There's about 5, maybe 6 studies now indicating that maybe 1,000 people died just between 9/11 and the end of 2001 because they drove rather than flew. So you have to consider that as part of the costs in many respects. The DHS has done a study in which they asked what is the value of a human life that's killed by terrorists, done by a risk analyst at Harvard by name Mary Robinson, and she concluded that a death by terrorism would be worth about $6.5 million. There's a whole literature on this about the cost of human life. And then she argues that because it's terrorism, it should be double, like 13 million. And we basically agree with that, except that we don't do it her way. What we do it is we assume that if any of the deaths is worth $6.5 million, $6.5 million, and then what we do is add on the other costs. The reason for that is that terrorism doesn't always cause that much in terms of ancillary costs. For example, 9/11, the direct costs of the buildings and the human lives, if it's 6.5 million per death, is well under $100 billion. We conclude that the costs of 9/11 are much more like $200 billion. That's because of all the other things, which I don't have to explain to anybody. But there's also the attack on Fort Hood, which killed 13 people. Now, obviously, there's 13 people who were killed, $6.5 million. There may have been some property damage, not much, obviously, but it's not clear there's been anything else. And no one is not going to Fort Hood because of the deaths there. Yeah, good.
But in Fort Hood, that was another curious thing. It sounded like you were saying that wasn't terrorism linked to Al-Qaeda, but I think there's a competing narrative where al-Awlaki was motivated this, and so it's being claimed to be a terrorist act.
Right. Some more recent stuff on that. Yeah. I'm perfectly willing to accept it as terrorism. Okay. It's just that it's not ambiguous, not unambiguous. He wasn't a jihadist who wanted to go out and like this other guy. He was influenced apparently by that guy. Yeah, right. But anyway, my point for this standpoint is that it doesn't that you'd have to add on if you add on the cost. Well, we're finding actually when we got more into this, because one of our key issues is how much does terrorism cost? The total cost. Again, not just the human costs, which are obviously the most important, but also the ancillary costs. The more we get into it, the lower they get. Because we looked at, for example, the terrorist attack on the subways, the underground in London in 2005. 7/7 attacks are called. And it's easy to calculate, obviously, the number of people who were killed, certain amount of injury, and the inconvenience of and the destruction of property and so forth. But there's also a big drop in tourism to London for at least several months, very calculable. And, tourist organizations are very good at getting these numbers. However, there was an increase to tourism in the rest of England. And so a lot of people said, well, London, I might do my London, I'm going to go, I've always wanted to go to Scotland, I don't think I'll do London this year, so Scotland, but anyway. So when you look at it, there's sort of a displacement thing. People don't do one thing, but they spend it another way. And so from London's standpoint, it was a cost, but not. And generally, it's happened. I don't want to downplay the cost of terrorism or how horrible terrorism is. But when you look at it harder, in some respects, it gets smaller rather than larger. Yes, sir.
Could you summarize your view of the risk of the terrorist obtaining a nuclear device?
Yeah, I did this book called Atomic Obsession. I have 4 chapters on it. The probabilities seem to be vanishingly small, in my conclusion. There's 3 ways to get the bomb. One would be to get it from a country that already has the bomb. And the problem for the country that has the bomb is that it now has a return address. With nuclear forensics and other things, it's extremely unlikely to imagine any country giving a bomb to somebody they can't control. For one reason, you think Al-Qaeda is not easy to control, that they would be using on you. So most people, in fact, looked at it and think that's not very likely. The other thing would be stealing a bomb. A second thing would be stealing a bomb that already exists. And there's this is the worry about loose nukes. And basically, there aren't very many. There aren't any, probably. But at any rate, it's pretty easy to lock them up. Furthermore, all loose nukes come with safeties on them. In the case of Pakistan, for example, their weapons are not only not loose, but they're in 2 different places. In other words, you have to steal 2 parts, know how to put them together, and then know how to set them off. The people who build the bombs don't know how to set them off. That's somebody else. And the people who maintain them don't know how to set them off. So it's fairly easy and cheap to have a lot of security measures on the bomb. So even if they get the bomb, they won't be able to do anything with it. The most likely measure, most people think, is they would steal a fissile material that would be highly enriched uranium or plutonium, and then they would fashion this into a bomb in a secret machine shop someplace. So that's what I mostly deal with in the book. And basically, the way I look at it is, okay, you're a terrorist and you want to do this. What do you have to do all these steps? They came up with about 20 of them. And let me just give you a couple of examples which sort of show the problem. Suppose you go to this place where there's uranium that you could get, highly enriched uranium in Russia someplace, and you try to buy it from a disgruntled Russian physicist. And he cooperates for a while. Then you try to get it from him and you pay him off and so forth. But the problem is that once he starts getting into this, he's going to realize that once he gives you the highly enriched uranium and you pay him off, your incentive would be to kill him because he knows who you are. And once they notice the uranium is missing, they're basically going to go after whoever might have been able to help that uranium be missed. So what you have to do is deal, and he's not likely to be a Muslim extremist, for example. He's just some guy who wants to get money. So, and also transporting it out of the country, you have to deal with probably bandits and so forth. The problems of manufacturing and putting it together, many physicists say virtually impossible for a sub-state group to do, to deal with. I mostly deal with social science type things, which is basically the criminal conspiracy that has to be put together. And you have to have everything working right, and it comes out to be, a chance of 1 in a million, 1 in a billion of having everything click. So that's the bottom line of my argument. But it's all spelled out in Atomic Obsession.
One more question, then we have to.
Okay.
I think this, the way we look at this issue may not be the right perspective. For the simple reason, for example, maybe a watch which we buy for $1 may show the same time that we buy a Rolex with say $100,000. So it doesn't mean that when spending the money on Rolex is a waste. We spend it just because we have the money. So what percentage of money is being spent in this country on anti-terrorism measures? Would it be an alarming kind of a thing?
Well, the issue would be basically whether, the question is whether the money is being spent wisely. It could be spent on other things. The issue is there's trade-offs. So if instead of spending $1 trillion on chasing terrorists in the United States, how about spending $1 trillion on fixing the roads? How many lives would that save? How much safety would there be? Essentially, there is this big demand from the public for make us safer. But that doesn't really, we have in the last couple of chapters a lot about the politics of the Homeland Security. That doesn't relieve the politicians and the bureaucrats from saying, I must spend that money wisely. The demand is for public safety. And so what you need to do is spend that money in a cost-effective manner. My money, tax money.
So what percentage, if you have the figures, what percentage is spent on this?
On the total expenditures on Homeland Security?
Yeah.
It's, as I said, about $1 trillion increase since 9/11 total.
Percentage?
What's the what?
Percentage. Percentage of the total expenditure.
That would be about 80% of it now. It used to be 20 billion, and it's gone up to about 70
The
billion.
percentage of the overall budget of the government.
Of the whole government?
Yeah.
Oh, it's like 1%, something like 2%.
Okay.
But that's a lot of money. And the question is, if you're spending on public safety, and these things, for example, reducing this danger would save a lot of lives. And even if you can't think terrorism deaths are much worse than automobile deaths, nonetheless, it behooves you as a public servant to spend in an important way. The first words in the Constitution are preserve, practically are preserve domestic tranquility. It's the main thing governments are there for. And therefore, the money, it seems to me, should be spent in a manner, despite, I know there's political pressures, I know there's emotion and so forth, but that doesn't relieve the decision makers from spending that money in a wise way. Because unless they have infinite budgets, which no one has that problem. It's a lot of money, absolutely. It's small compared to the total budget of the government, but it's still a lot of money. And if it's not being spent well, it means that other areas in which is clearly be more cost effective are being neglected. And that's would be the issue, the ultimate bottom line issue.
So like I said in the introduction, Professor Mueller is really good at making people think. Right? If you'd like to continue, if you want to give him a hard time, and I encourage you to do that.
You won't be the first.
I encourage you to give him a hard time. We have to vacate this room, but if you have questions, you're welcome to join us up in the in-skit suite to ask. So thank you.
Thanks very much.